seemed to be to have a year-end bill that strengthened the power of the leaders and of the Appropriations Committee and the House and Senate, but weakened the voices and the input that came from rank and file members. So we really changed that. And I think the greatest frustration to us is we could not get Chuck Schumer, the Democratic floor leader, to bring the bills to the floor. And that was extremely frustrating after all the work that we'd done. Still, it was a massive improvement. I want to continue down that track. I want the members of the subcommittees to work together to produce their bills, to report them out on time. And I'll tell you, this approach works. Of the 12 appropriations bills this past year, 6 of them were reported unanimously. Mm-hmm. That just doesn't happen. So as far as the new effort on government efficiency, I can never remember how it's pronounced, I will admit. I had an excellent 70-minute meeting with Elon Musk, and I was very impressed. Now, maybe it's because I just watched the SpaceX rocket return to Earth and be captured by those arms, which just blew me away. Mm-hmm. And frankly, is more advanced than what NASA and DOD can do right now. So what impressed me the most is he really listened. Now, I'm not sure he accepts all of what I said, but I started with, and I think you just had a talk on this, the fact that under the Appropriations Committee, yes, we have jurisdiction over all discretionary spending, but that's just 28% of the budget. And I gave him a chart that shows that discretionary spending has remained relatively flat, while mandatory spending has gone through the roof. And more spending is being classified as mandatory in order to avoid the scrutiny of the appropriations process. So that is a real problem. I talked to him mainly about defense procurement reforms. It is such an encrusted bureaucracy at the Department of Defense. I have great respect for the men and women who work there, but they are hampered by the rules. So if you are an innovative small company with new technology that would help our warfighters, it is so hard for you to break in. And what DOD has done is established all these innovative units. DIU is one, the Defense Innovation Unit. DARPA's been around for a long time, and several others to try to deal with this issue. But as I told Elon, I got them together, listened to the exciting things they were working on, and then I said to them, do you ever talk to each other? And it's so siloed, and that's a real problem. Mm-hmm. So I think having this outside perspective from Elon and Vivek, who I've also went to a bigger meeting with, the one with Elon was one-on-one, may well come up with some very valuable ideas. And I'll tell you, I agree wholeheartedly with them that we need to get federal employees back to work.
Yeah.
At their work sites.
Yes, absolutely. You know what I love about what Senator Collins just walked us through is exactly how she approaches things. She's educating Elon Musk about, how government works, which is the value of how Susan approaches everything. I mean, she just is thoughtful. She's a participant. She listens, and then she works with the other side. And let's talk a little bit about the infrastructure bill from a historical perspective, because it's exciting what you're going to go forward with, but really some of the big significant legislative successes that No Labels has been a part of for the last 14 years, you have been a key conduit in that success. And, we have representation here from all 50 states and people that have been actively engaged in this out in the out in America, and they would love to hear some of the, like, on the infrastructure bill, like, how do you select the co-sponsors? How do you go about the process? When something's about to die, how do you bring it back? I mean, like, some of the inside perspective of such a successful bill.
Well, I'm really proud of the infrastructure bill because it's the largest investment in infrastructure since the interstate highway was built during the Eisenhower administration. And infrastructure is about more than just roads and bridges and ports. It's about broadband. And having access to high-speed internet is essential for economic development, for medicine, for education. And in a state like mine, there are many parts of the state, the more rural parts of the state, that are still unserved or underserved. And so I was determined that that be part of it too. The 4 people who started the infrastructure task force were myself, Joe Manchin, Rob Portman, and Kirsten Sinema. And the 4 of us got together and we put together a core group of 10 senators, but there was a broader group of about 22 working on it. But think of why we had to do it. We had to do this because the committee system was not working to produce that kind of broad legislation, despite a lot of good efforts and a bill to reauthorize the federal highway system. But it just wasn't working. So we met constantly. And I will tell you, the secret when you come to an impasse, which we often did, is food and wine. That does it. What can I tell you? So in my hideaway, or Kirsten or Rob's hideaway, or Joe's, when things were getting rough, because we were meeting after a long day, and we would bring in pizza and wine. And all of a sudden, people get friendlier, less intransigent, and they start working together. And actually, I think there really is an underlying truth there, and that is, it's really hard to demonize people with whom you break bread. And one of the problems in Washington, which is very different from when I first came there, is people get out of town as fast as they can. They arrive as late as they can, and they no longer move their families here for the most part. And thus you don't see these relationships being formed that transcend politics and make it, you don't have those friendships. It's friendships. And you did in the, when I first came, I was first sworn in 1997, so it goes back quite a ways, and I've seen a remarkable change. But I got to tell you, and I know I'm talking too long, but I'll speed up. I've got to tell you one story that I think is so indicative of the work on the infrastructure bill. So Jean Shaheen and I, a Democrat from New Hampshire, as most of you know, all of you know, and one of my best friends in the Senate, were assigned to do, or assigned to ourselves, to do the broadband section. And this is important to both of our states. So we negotiated with Gina Raimondo, whom I think was one of the best cabinet picks that President Biden had. And what we did is we met in my office late at night because we had a really tough deadline. And Gina was on the phone, and we kept going through these issues. And Gina had to make the case for rate regulation for the administration, which we were totally opposed to. But once she realized that was a non-starter, she moved on to other issues that were important. So at 12:15 a.m., literally, we finally have finished the package. And I getting ready to stand up and go home. And Jean says wisely, you know, I think we should go through everything one more time. And I'm like, oh, you gotta be kidding. And she was totally right. It turned out that there were two areas where we thought we had agreement, but we didn't. And it was just an honest, misunderstanding, given all that we've been through. But so we went through the whole thing and identified those issues, reached agreement, sealed the deal, and I think it was 2 a.m. we finally left the office and went home. But that was a really rewarding experience. Mm-hmm. And without that bipartisan group, it never would have gotten done. Never.
Well, and I think it's so important that we talk about when the role No Labels plays in the convening and the relationship building. And you're hearing this with Senator Collins saying that's where the meat happens. That's where the action happens. And I think it's a great story to the picture, or picture to the story that you just shared for everybody here to sort of learn from. So thank you for doing that.
And one final note on that, it was No Labels who put together the House group that helped us get it through the House. We were very concentrated on the Senate, and No Labels helped us work with Josh Gottheimer and others to get it through the House.
So another area that you have spent a tremendous amount of time on is healthcare. 1,900 bills. Susan sponsored so many of these bills and led the way on so many different efforts under healthcare, Alzheimer's being one of them. How do you think you're going to go about now with the post-election, new administration, healthcare reform? I know President Trump the last time tried to repeal Obamacare. It's now been 14 years. So where is this going to go? Piece by piece, comprehensively? What are you sort of thinking about from healthcare, which is a big issue facing America?
So biomedical research is my #1 priority. Mm-hmm. It's closely followed by strong national defense, more work on infrastructure, rural development, workforce development. But biomedical research is so critical, and we can't go backwards. We have been gradually increasing the budget for the National Institutes of Health over the years. Now, have there been some mistakes? Undoubtedly. But, when you do research grants and the research, quote, fails, it isn't failing. It's eliminating a possible cause. Mm-hmm. That's progress. Mm-hmm. And I am fascinated by biomedical research. I meet with the scientists and the researchers on the front lines all the time, including yesterday. And I think it's key. It's also key to our budget. When I can't appeal to a colleague to help me on Alzheimer's for humanitarian reasons and because it's such a devastating disease, I talk to them about the financial impact. If we continue on the current trajectory, by the year 2050, we will be spending $1 trillion on Alzheimer's and other dementia as our population is aging. And that's all sources, public and private. And we can't afford that. But this is something that is also personal to me. I've lost my brother-in-law recently to the disease, but more directly, my father, my grandfather, and 2 uncles. And I know the devastating impact. I know the toll that it places on caregivers, and we're making progress now. Finally, we've moved beyond just looking at amyloid plaque and looking at tau tangles in the brain to the role of inflammation, for example. There's exciting research. There are 2 drugs that are on the market for the first time that, if administered early, have been shown to slow the rate of cognitive decline by as much as 30%. That's huge. If you can delay for a few years, So I'm going to continue to push full ahead on healthcare issues. I do want to use healthcare as an example of showing where bipartisan works. I know that this sounds incredibly self-serving, and probably is, but let me give you just a couple of statistics. In this Congress, there were 1,869 healthcare-related bills that were introduced. Of those, only 10 have made it to the president's desk. Only 10. And I was the co-author or the author of 4 of the 10, and I expect another one to be signed into law soon. And the reason I mentioned that is it's because I do build these coalitions to back these bills that are always bipartisan, always, without exception. After all, whether you're working on diabetes, which is another issue that I work hard on, or Alzheimer's, those diseases don't really care what your political party is, and that it needs to be a bipartisan effort. I am worried that there's going to be an attempt by the new administration to either decrease or overhaul NIH in a way that may set us back. And I will certainly push against that, form a bipartisan coalition, work with no labels to prevent that from happening. That money is so well spent.
You can see why No Labels considers Susan a champion. She is always building the bipartisan efforts. And really, before our time ends up, which we still have a couple more minutes, I just want you to share, because Senator Lieberman was our North Star. And he sadly passed away this last year and really just took the breath away from all of us that had the honor of working with him and seeing his energy and his purpose and mission be No Labels. And you were very close to Senator Lieberman, did many trips that I saw pictures of around the world. And I would just love to have you share a couple insights with from Senator Lieberman and your time and his observation and his commitment to this work with our audience.
I loved Joe Lieberman. I really did. And I kept in touch with him after he left the Senate. No Labels made that easy to do. And I was always so grateful that he kept involved and kept pursuing bipartisan initiatives. And he had such personal strength. He was so principled. I absolutely adored working with him. We did the post-9/11 Intelligence Reform Act that was the most sweeping reorganization of our intelligence community since post-World War II. We worked on FEMA reform in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. We worked together to repeal the discriminatory Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I had more legislative achievements with Joe Lieberman than anyone else in the Senate, and it was because of his extraordinary leadership. So I want to tell you a story, which his former chief of staff has heard a couple of times now, about Joe. We were on a very long trip to Afghanistan, and we got into a discussion of Jewish guilt versus Catholic guilt. Because I am a practicing Catholic, and obviously he was a very devout Jew. And we were going back and forth over which imposed more guilt feelings on you, more burdens, etc. And finally, he came up with the perfect Joe Lieberman answer, which was, "My people invented it," he said. "Your people perfected it." Now, isn't that a great revelation?
Thank you for for sharing that, because he is the heart and soul of what No Labels believes in, and so are you. Your leadership is, I just sitting here listening to you, I mean, I hope many of our members out here know, and our colleagues know, how different Senator Collins is from so many leaders, because she gets behind the scenes and she stays on the phone till 2 in the morning making sure everything's buttoned up, and she's building coalitions, and we need to support her as she goes forward in terms of the new administration and this new opportunity as head of Senate Appropriations, which is really just an honor to you, because you've earned that, but it's going to be exciting to watch you orchestrate it in the way that you're going to do it, and it's going to be different, and it's going to be great.
Thank you.
Any closing remarks that you'd like to say?
Again, I just want to thank all of you for your activism and participation with No Labels. It can, when you're in the center and trying to work with both sides, the corollary of that is you get hit hard by the far left and the far right. I just learned that Heritage Action is going to start running ads to try to pressure me, which never works, so I don't know why they bother. But they're starting ads in Maine this weekend. And, you know, it's hard not to let that make you weary when you are working so hard and trying to do what you think is right for your state and for America. And having the support of an organization like No Labels, having No Labels there for us, matters. It makes a huge difference, because what you have are the groups on the far left and the far right who demand 100% compliance, that's the word, 100% compliance with 100% of their views 100% of the time. I'm never going to be like that, ever. And the problem is, you need support. You need help in telling your story and in showing people that you are in fact doing the right thing. But it's a difficult environment, particularly with social media these days.
Absolutely.
My staff just tells me, do not read your Twitter comments. But again, thank you so much for all that you do. You are making a difference. You're bringing us together, House and Senate. That's a major accomplishment in and of itself, Democrats and Republicans. And please keep up your great work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Senator Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma, Congressman Richie Torres of New York, Dusty Johnson of South Dakota, Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey, and No Labels Governing Board Chair Andy Bursky.
Good morning. Good morning. So do me a favor, take out your cameras. Take a picture, you don't include me, take a picture of these four guys, because there will be tougher days ahead. But these four guys are precisely what No Labels is all about. These are not shrinking violets. These are not centrists. These are people of strong principles with very, very different political views. But they're committed to work together to solve the country's problems. And that is the essence of what we have worked for 14 years to create, is an environment where people don't check their opinions or beliefs at the door. They bring them into the room, and they figure out how to get to solutions in light of what they believe. And there are no better representatives of that than these four individuals. So I want to thank all of you. There's also another astounding fact about Washington that I didn't appreciate until I started coming down here a decade and a half ago, which is the longest 100 yards in the country, maybe in the world, is the 100 yards between the Senate and the House. And what you're seeing here just doesn't happen anywhere else. The willing coming together of senators and members of the House in shared purpose, and the power of that getting together, building relationships, and finding ways to legislate together at the front end of the process is enormous. We're going to talk about that second, but where I want to begin this morning, gentlemen, is to talk a little bit about policy. I think there's lots of reasons to be concerned, but I think there's lots of reasons, frankly, to be quite optimistic about what the next many months may hold for this Congress. So I want to start with the Senator. Where do you see the most immediate policy opportunities, and how do you think we can get at it, Senator?
Well, thank you, and thank you guys for being here. If I knew we were going to take a picture, I would have sat more in the middle, because this ear's the worst. This is my bad side. No, you can't talk about policy unless you talk about the politics, and I do mean that, because you have to put the politics in front of the policy. The policy can be the greatest policy in the world, but if it gets caught up in politics, it dies. And it's kind of like timing. Timing for the policy is the most important thing outside of the politics. And so when you work like with Josh and I, how Josh and I have worked together for quite some time, and we built a friendship now for, how long has it been? 8 years? 8 years. And
I'm in deep therapy.
Yeah. This is true. I do give him a hard time a lot. It's the only guy I can make fun of for being shorter than me. But when you start talking about the politics, when you got a group of people like we have here on stage, and like Susan Collins and the other people you'll hear from today, there's a trust that's being built that we're not going to get either side in trouble. We know there's sticky points. There's places where they can't go because they're based, and there's places that we can't go to. So when we start talking about policy, that's the first thing that usually goes in the conversation is what's your full stop? Where do we need to stay away from? There's going to be certain points at certain time during negotiations you're going to have to step in that boundary. And when it goes too far, we're also open enough with each other where we'll say, hey, you probably can't support this one. This isn't going to be good for you. And that's just the politics of it. But when you find the policy that you can move forward, you jump all in. Like one thing right now is permit reform. When you start really looking at why permit reform can actually be accomplished, is because one side is looking at wanting to electrify the country. I'm not there, but I'm saying one side is. They can't do it unless they upgrade the grid. And in order to upgrade the grid, they've got to have permit reform. Because PG&E right now in California, they have been begging for permit reform so they can just go clean the right-of-ways. Because when the wind starts blowing, it starts knocking their power out. They can't upgrade their system because they can't get in there to pull new wire because they can't get through the permitting process to even get out there to do it. And so now they have rolling blackouts and they get blamed for it. And when a fire takes place, they get blamed for it. But really, they've been trying to upgrade their system. But it takes years before they can even go into some forest areas to do it. And then you start looking from our side of it, it's like, yeah, we want permit reform too because we want to put pipes in the ground. We want to be able to get product, oil and gas, from point A to point B. And the more you got delivery systems, the more it'll bring down the cost of energy. So you can't go one without the other. You can't separate them. You actually are going to have to work forward. Well, who's the barrier that's standing in between us? EPA. Whoa, you say EPA, you got some environmentalist group that start saying, hold on, you can't touch that. But no, you can if you do it, if you're still talking about the energy and we're not talking from different sides and blaming each other. We're saying, no, there's a way to do this in an economic way. Because cost of living is way too high for every state right now. Regardless if you're a blue state, if you're a red state, regardless if you're in a red district or a blue district, it's too high, and all of our constituents are saying that. And the only way you can bring down the cost of goods is you got to bring down the cost of energy, because energy is the backbone of every price out there. I don't care if it's from a retail price or it's from a construction price. That is the beginning of your set price, is what does it cost to build and deliver the product. And energy is the starting point of that. So there is a place for us to start talking about with permit reform. And then when you start talking about taxes, the House already proved that they can get a bipartisan bill on taxes. Honestly, the Senate's where that died. But if we don't do something in taxes, next year, America is going to see a $4 trillion increase in taxes, because all the 2017 tax provisions that Trump put in will be completely expired. That means businesses and personal income. Your R&D, your research and development, which is huge for businesses, right? Or your middle class and lower income that's going to have a huge increase in taxes, that affects all of us. And that's an area that we can start talking about. And the same thing with immigration reform. We start talking about immigration reform. That was the #1 topic in most places. There's a big difference between immigration reform. That's why it's been 2.5 decades or 3 decades. I think it was Reagan. So it's been 3 decades, Josh? It's been, you was on his team, right? No, I'm kidding. You was a speechwriter, weren't you? Oh, wait,
that was Bill Clinton, somebody who cut the deck.
Yeah. Anyways, that's going to be a touchy subject, but this group, the people you're hearing from today, is going to be the people that's going to be able to deliver that, because we're going to build trust among each other and be able to work with other colleagues on the other side. So thank you for what you guys are doing. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah. So let me turn to your favorite sparring partner, Mr. Gottheimer. You've set the table. You laid out sort of the table of contents. We've got permit reform. We've got immigration. We've got tax. Take on any one of those. What do you see as the possibilities and a pathway?
So first of all, thank you again. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to my friends for being up here too. Ex ante Mark Wayne, obviously. I work out with this guy every morning. So the problem you have to understand is, if you've noticed, he was an MMA fighter in life before he was here. So at any moment, if you don't agree with him, he'll literally toss you across the room. So you have to be very careful on how you disagree with him and engage.
And you're tossable, Josh. So.
Andy, I mean, like, you sure? If I stood on your shoulders, we could be one full person. So, sorry.
It wasn't that funny.
Listen. There's huge opportunity. You have a couple realities going on here, and we've all talked about this. In this new Congress, you have for the first 100 days, a 1-seat majority in the House of Representatives Republicans are dealing with, which is not easy for any party to have to deal with, and obviously a narrow Senate, but it's the House that I think is going to be a real challenge. And you have people in seats that are swingy, and you've got midterms coming up, and that will hang over everything. But you've got a new president with an agenda. So the question is, how do you get stuff done? I'm hugely bullish on the idea that it will take us all working together to do it. And I think that's well set up for groups like the Problem Solvers Caucus and those of us who are sitting down regularly just around the table, which we've been doing. And by the way, that's how, if you look at the biggest legislation over the last 8 years, 10 years has gotten done, it's because groups of us have been willing to actually talk to each other and figure out, as Mark Wayne said, where are the places we can agree, right? There's plenty of places we're going to disagree, but where are the places we can agree and get to 80% and move forward? That's been the recipe for success. That's how every piece of legislation, including in this Congress, has gotten done. And it should be the recipe going forward. I look at the tax reform piece as a huge opportunity for a bipartisan bill. Because in the House, as Mark Wayne said, as really, I think, generating out of the House, you've got issues like the state and local tax deduction or SALT, that many of us from states like mine and Jersey are focused on how do we get more SALT there and how do we get tax cuts for people and make life more affordable. Because to me, the #1 message out of this election is, hey, people are hurting and they want us to make sure we focus on making their lives more affordable, whether that's energy costs, taxes, their health care costs, right? You name it. They want us to help listen to that and be responsive to that. And tax policy is the place to do it. And we're already talking about places where we can do it, including, as you know, Mark Wayne's good friend and good fellow friend of ours, Jason Smith, who's the chairman of the committee, of the Ways and Means Committee, he gets that. And I think there's a huge opportunity for us to do work there together. And I think Richie and Dusty and I, if we all hang out together and spend time together, which is what I think is the best policy comes out of, best durable policy, we can do that. And these other areas, like immigration, we've been working on for years. Forever, we've sat at the table on this. Forever. And we know where the answer is. The question is, are we going to have the courage to do it? Right? That's really the question. Like, are you going to want it as a political issue in the next campaign, or do you want to solve the problem? And I think we've got a group of people here and elsewhere that want to solve this problem. We know we have to. The people just told us we have to. So the question is, do you get a good enough group who are willing to do it? And I think we can.
Thanks, Josh. I want to turn to Dusty Johnson. Dusty is one of the deepest thinking policy guys I've ever met. I would recommend all of you get on his mailing list. The way to do that is to send him a check. But the reason is he sends out periodically these really well done
Lost my phone.
discussions of current policy matters. So why don't you take some of that brilliance and share it with us today in terms of what you see as some of the ripe opportunities.
Did you say Dustin with brilliance?
I know.
Was that bad?
Do you put Dusty in the same category?
I
That's a
apologize.
first.
No one's saying that about you, man.
No, I didn't say that. In fact, I'm up here looking for my phone. I can't remember where I put my phone.
Richie, yes.
Yeah, Richie,
So
absolutely.
as long as we're all sharing our workout stories, I'll self-report. I worked out twice in the gym about 30 years ago. It didn't do a thing for me, and I haven't gone back. So other than the things that have been mentioned that I don't agree with, both parties have a growing populist isolationism streak that manifests itself in trade, how they view Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and frankly, how they view immigration as well. It's going to be critically important that groups like this, in a bicameral, bipartisan way, understand that some of these things make sense. Listen, do we need to recalibrate the economic relationship between China and the United States of America? Absolutely we do. So it's not that we need to reject the whole idea of reform. It is that I think if we get caught up in some sort of populist rage, that we will be driven by xenophobia or industrial policy or protectionism or isolationism, and our country is there periodically, we could make all of us a whole lot less safe and a whole lot poorer in a hurry. And I think one thing that we can do is have a real thoughtful conversation about what do these trading relationships need to look like, what does aid to other countries look like, what is America's role in the world, and I have to tell you, the most thoughtful thinkers in those areas are involved in these no labels, problem solvers caucus type efforts. This is generational type impact we can have.
Thanks, Dustin. Congressman Torres, your thoughts?
Look, I feel like, just to offer
perspective of a Democrat, I feel we have no choice but to address.
You don't even count Josh as one of those. I know most Democrats don't, but yeah.
No, he's a Democrat and he's congressionally tall. So get it. Okay. I think we have no choice but to address the issue of border security. For me, one of the lessons learned from the election is we swung the pendulum too far to the left on the issue of immigration. I feel like we lost principally because of inflation, but also because of the egregious mishandling of the migrant crisis. And frankly, the gargantuan gaslighting around the migrant crisis. And so I feel like we have to get serious about border security. You know, for far too long, I think we in the Democratic Party, not everyone, but many in the party, saw border security as a Republican right-wing position. And we have to disabuse ourselves of that notion. You know, one of my favorite quotes comes from Fiorello LaGuardia, who said there's no Democratic or Republican way to take out the trash. Like, no one sees sanitation as a left-wing or right-wing position. We simply see it as something government does. And I think we have to see border security and public safety not as a right-wing or left-wing position, but simply as something government does, as a core function of government. So I feel like there has to be a fundamental rethinking of the Democratic Party's position on border security, or else we're going to continue losing elections. I also see, because, you know, I feel like the reason we lost the election was not white supremacy, it was not misogyny, it was incompetence. Like, people have a right to expect an affordable cost of living, secure borders, safe streets, and it turns out that those concerns cut across every racial category in American politics. And so that's where our focus should be. I also feel like I see the emergence, especially with all the rhetoric about Doge, I do see the emergence of a bicameral, bipartisan commitment to improving the efficiency of government, you know, which includes the need to streamline permitting processes and streamline environmental review. And for me, I think what's often lost in this conversation is the human element, and so I just want to share a quick anecdote. I happen to be Puerto Rican. I care deeply about the island of Puerto Rico, which is home to more than 3 million American citizens. And we have 3 million American citizens who essentially lack access to reliable, affordable energy. The electric grid in Puerto Rico was so poorly managed for so long that 16,000 miles of vegetation was allowed to grow under transmission lines. And so every time the wind blows or it rains, it causes massive outages, affecting hundreds of thousands and in some cases millions of people. And during one of our congressional hearings, I asked the operator of the grid, how long will it take you to clear the vegetation, which is separate and apart from modernizing the grid? And he said, 3 years. 2 years is the physical process, and then 1 year a regulatory process with fish and wildlife. And then I said, well, what if there's environmental review? Well, he said, well, if there's environmental review, an environmental assessment would bring it from 3 to 4 years. And an environmental impact statement would bring it to a minimum of 3 to 8 years. So the greatest country on earth, it took us 1 year to build the Empire State Building. And it's going to take us 8 years, not to modernize the grid, but to clear vegetation. Like, the system is fundamentally broken. And there needs to be a bipartisan, bicameral commitment to fixing it. And when government fails, people suffer deeply. There is no hope for Puerto Rico, and it breaks my heart to say this, there's no hope for Puerto Rico without reliable, affordable energy. It's foundational to civilization.
And just to underline what Richie's saying, I mean, this is a uniquely American problem. The same kind of project you can get permitted in France or Italy in 2 years takes 7 years in America. The same project you can get done in Australia in 2 years. It takes 7 years to get done in America. It does not have to be this way.
And can I add one thing to that?
Sure.
Because I think this is kind of what you're seeing here, I believe, is actually where we will do best in coming together. Right? So, yes, we all look at this challenge of how do we clear the muck from a different place. Right? In Jersey, I hate to say, it's the same thing, right, as New York and everywhere else. Everything takes forever. So people don't want to bring their jobs there because it takes them 6 years to put up a building, right, and 20 different departments and 20 different agencies to review everything. And we see it, we're doing it, we're trying to get infrastructure built, like a road, right, or a rail, or transit. It takes forever. You have the CHIPS bill, you're trying to build a new factory to help us compete. It takes forever. And so people are really frustrated. Richie's right, like I've been going to diners and around Jersey, because I'm running for governor, I'm running around Jersey, and every place I go, because everything in Jersey starts in a diner, everything good, every conversation I go to, and I said earlier this morning, also the end could also be in a diner where you can get whacked. You know, every discussion is nearly the same. I'm incredibly frustrated. Everything costs too much. Like everything takes too long. Just get it done, guys. Why is this so hard? And I think that's our job, is to actually get stuff done for people. They don't care if it's Democrat or Republican, to the LaGuardia point. They just want you to do it, right? They want you to solve their problem. Can you be a problem solver? Are you willing to work with other people and willing to get it done? They don't want to hear about about the extremes and why they're screaming and yelling. They just want you to get stuff done for them.
Thanks. Thank you all. Thank you. I want to turn for a moment to process. It's how do we get it done? And I think one of the things that all of you at No Labels can be so proud of is we have been the process enabler. We have been the convener. Love to get your thoughts on some of the process elements, why bringing members of the Senate and the House is so important, bringing them together. Want to talk about that? Want to talk about one of the elephants in the room, which is will the Democrats be the resistors, or will they be participants in this process? But let me first turn to Senator Mullen, who's really been on the forefront of bringing our group together and leading the charge. And Senator Mullen is very well respected by the administration, has a very close relationship with the President-elect. Talk about process, talk about how that relationship may help what we're trying to get done here.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, Richie, I'm telling you, I'm so impressed every time I hear you speak that he needs to be the one articulating this. I mean, the way you articulated that and laid it out in such a precise way and left emotions completely out of it, I'm thoroughly impressed. I mean, I've heard you talk before, but that was impressive. I mean that. I mean, he's not really an attractive guy, but he talks well. So I mean, he's not like Obama or anything. But I mean, I just. So, anyways, you know, the process really is breaking down the barriers. First thing I noticed when I got over to the Senate was, you're right, the 100 yards between the chambers is the longest 100 yards you've ever went in your life. And we spent half our time in the Republican conference talking about what they were doing in the Republican conference in the House. And I finally just raised my hand and I was like, hey, I know I'm a freshman here, but would you like me to be the liaison between the two? I mean, we don't have to guess. All we got to do is ask a question. I mean, we even have these things called cell phones we can call. But since we don't want to do that, I can just walk. I mean, it's not that hard. I didn't realize how many barricades there was between the two, though, until I started doing it. But once I got there and we started talking about it, you saw you saw people really start looking at things a little different and respecting the challenges, uniqueness between them. We are one Congress, two chambers, and it is vastly different. The process that you have to go through, the rules, the debates, the mindset, the personalities, they are extremely different. And to marry those two is a whole nother process. But one thing you have to realize is that's what our founding fathers wanted it to be. If you go back and if you actually read the Federalist Papers, you'll understand they wanted Congress to be dysfunctional. So when people say, why don't you all get along? It was never designed for us to get along. It was designed for it to be a thoughtful process and heavily debated so it couldn't move as fast as it moves sometimes. And it doesn't move through legislation fast, it moves through executive orders fast. And that is a huge problem because when it moves that fast, it creates destabilization throughout the economy, throughout the country, throughout foreign policy, because it changes too quick. And we have to get back to actually allowing Congress to make the legislation. We have to understand that. So before you can even fix the process, you actually got to fix the executive order issue. And then you start working on that process. And I think the process can be worked out. It's new, it's different because of social media, because everything you do constantly leaks and people make the assumption before they get the facts, which is why it's important when you're working in groups like this that it stays private, which is one of the reasons why we meet where we meet, and we don't meet on the Hill, we meet off the Hill. We have open conversations because we don't want the media to get there, and we work with people that we can trust because we can't allow the process to get out yet on what we're working with because social media and your left media and your right media both jump to conclusions, and it kills the process before you can even get started. And then you cannot think about doing anything unless you're working with the administration too. One of the bills that Josh and I worked on, we had to work with two administrations because we had to work with the incoming administration and the outgoing administration. Josh was having to lean heavily on what's happening in the White House, and I had to lean heavily what was going on in Mar-a-Lago, and we had to get both sides to agree before the package should even move. Once it said, when those two both signed off on it, it went quick. I'm working on a thing right now that I have been working on for a couple weeks now. We were this close from having a deal because and I'm not going to throw anybody off the bus, but because of a person in leadership in the Senate, it's derailed the whole thing because regardless of what's best for the country right now, which this package would be the best for the country because it would avoid a CR and it would avoid a debt limit fight. But because one person is holding on to the debt limit and is refusing to allow that to be part of the package because they want to be able to use it for negotiation next year, it's going to kill the whole process. We were at a deal. 24 hours ago, actually I guess it's 36 hours ago, we had a deal made. It was done. And both administrations had agreed to it. One person stopped it. One person in leadership stopped it. All because they didn't want to put debt limit in there. Because they want to have a fight with it. They want to use it for negotiation. That's bad. That's the process that we find ourselves in right now because we are forgetting what's important, and it's the American people. Who loses is American people. And that's why no labels is so important because no labels, we have broke that down. I can tell you every one of us, well, with the exception of Josh, who's running for governor, and who knows what this guy does. I think there's a rumor about you running for governor. I don't know.
And Richie.
Is there something going on here? I'm going to go off stage with you all. Why am I wasting my time with you guys? You're not even going to be here anymore. No, but I'm kidding about that. But with the exception of this group, politics does get caught up in it. I mean, we're already talking about midterm elections. I really think we have 6 months to actually get something done. After 6 months, everybody starts splintering and starts worrying about their primary and starts worrying about their general. Think about that. We have 6 months to get something done for the country. To leave the politics behind, to leave the party behind, and just do what's right. What a crazy idea. Do what's right for this country. And you guys participating and us participating, we can actually get some real accomplishments in 6 months. Outside of that, it's going to be tough.
Thanks, Senator. Josh, let me turn to you. This issue of the resistance, which has been a topic for ever since November 5th. How do you see that playing out? What's it going to take to get your colleagues in both the House and Democrats in the Senate to show up and engage and allow this administration to have some victories in a bipartisan fashion?
I'm going to turn that to Richie, if that's okay. So, listen, I think there are plenty of places where we can find common ground here, and what we've always done in the Problem Solvers Caucus, listen, when it was Trump's first term, but it's during the Biden administration, we look for the places where we can find 80% solutions and put the country first, and we get together and we get them done. And I think that's the same recipe we should use going forward. There's going to be plenty of places where we can work together, as you're hearing about right here, right? Plenty of places, and that's where we should sit together. You're always going to have people on both sides who are focused more on throwing tacks in the road than on getting stuff done. That's always been the way our country's been. It'll always be the same way. Mark Wayne was talking about social media. You're always going to have a lot of loud people who are not there to govern, but are there to either be social media stars or to obstruct. That's going to happen, right? And we should expect it. The question is, are there enough people who could sit in the room and get stuff done? And listen, I'm going to be the first one. I'm sure Richie will too. If we disagree with something, or if it's bad for Jersey, I'm going to speak out against it. If it's good for the country and good for the people I represent, I'm going to support it and call balls and strikes. That's what you're supposed to do as a legislator. And I'm sure Mark Wayne will do the same thing, Dusty will, for their states they represent. And so I think that's how we should approach it. But the will is here to govern and get stuff done. And we got to look at this opportunity to do that. And that's what I'm excited about. Like, you've got great people who are willing to do it. And now we just got to take advantage of this moment. And listen, the fact that you all have been so supportive of people who get in the room together and are willing to do this and have the courage to do this, I think we've got to make sure we keep supporting that and not run off to our respective corners.
Well, while you've got the mic,
You can applaud. It's okay. Mark Wayne, if you want to applaud.
I don't want to cut off the adulation here. I'm going to take Mark Wayne's bait. You have announced for governor. I haven't heard from Dusty and Richie yet, but you have announced for governor. How do you see? Just take a minute maybe and talk about how you see the no labels approach translating into the governor's mansion.
Well, given that I'm sitting with several future governors here, and again, Mark Wayne, you want to run?
I'm not running.
Okay.
Nope, not happening.
Listen, what excites me is that we need and have the opportunity to have problem solvers governors in the country. We have several, but there's no reason why we don't have a group of people who, and get rooms filled like this, with those who want to back governors who are national leaders on so many issues and had run laboratories in their states where many of the best ideas come out of, and fight the fights that are critically important day to day. There's no reason we can't do exactly what we've done in Washington and bring it to state by state level and bring a group together with problem solvers governors. And that's going to be something that when I get elected, first thing I'm going to do is try to get governors from around the country to get in a room, and hopefully with a lot of people like you, and say, what can we do at the state level of bringing people together to solve the same problems that we're trying to solve in Washington and bring the same spirit of putting the country first. So that's the plan.
Thanks.
And Dusty and Richie have signed up already.
Let me return to the Beltway here. Dusty, you've been a part of several sessions. You've seen what works and what doesn't work. You've been an important part of making things work. Talk a little bit about process. Maybe just sort of crystallize why it is so important for senators and members of the House to be engaged early on in the dialogue.
Everything is a lot harder than it should be in D.C. Everything is much, much harder. Josh is right, though. Every single major legislative package in the 6 years that I've been around had the problem solvers or that type of folks right there at the start. And there are people who care about the politics only, and then there are people like Mark Wayne who understand that the marriage of the politics and the policy is where real magic happens. And so from a process perspective, it is the problem solvers who understand that marriage of politics and policy. That politics is the art of possible. But that we can't just play the political games. And Andy, I got to tell you, there is a lot of reason for optimism. I know there's a lot of trepidation. We don't really know what the next 2 years or 6 months will hold. But I do know that every major accomplishment of the 119th Congress will have the people on this stage involved in the earliest days.
Richie, I happen to agree with what the senator said. You are an extraordinary, clear spokesman for really important issues. So just couldn't be more impressed with what you bring to the table.
I love it when people speak poetically about democratic incompetence. It's remarkable. It's remarkable.
So Richie,
I think both parties can benefit from introspection, I will just say.
I'm still upset that you're even considering running for governor. I mean, I just found a friend, and now you're leaving me. It's like, I was like, we went on one date, and you're dumping me.
I'm exploring because I'm wary of commitment.
I'm committed. I've been married for 27 years, but I'm thinking about jumping ship here. No, I'm kidding.
Here's one of my frustrations, one of my self-reflections, is I feel like federal governance consists of blue state representatives like Josh and myself, passing laws like the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act, whose benefits overwhelmingly flow into red states. And the reason is simple. Those are the easiest states to do business and the easiest states to build. Like state and local governance in states like New York is fundamentally failing. And that's why part of the reason I'm exploring a run for governor is, can we fundamentally improve the quality of governance in states like New York and New Jersey? Because what good is delivering resources from Washington, D.C. if those resources are inefficiently spent? I mean, think about the AI revolution, right? The AI is going to lead to the proliferation of data centers, which requires huge amounts of energy. Where do you think those AI centers are going to be sited? It's not going to be sited in New York, which just closed Indian Point. And I think nuclear happens to be the most reliable form of clean energy. And so I feel like there's going to be a limit to what we can do in Washington, D.C. until we fundamentally change the quality of governance in our cities and our states. We deserve better than what a broken system can deliver.
Sadly, our time has come to an end, but I'm hopeful that you will take away from this conversation the optimism that I have in hearing these folks engage, talk about the issues substantively. There's obviously a level of camaraderie here that's fundamental to being able to get to solutions. Couldn't be more impressed, more happy that you're on the team. Senator, Congressman, thank you so much for this morning.
Thank you so much.
So, see everybody's taking a little break. That's good. We're going to bring up another senator here in a moment. I just want to come up real quick to just give everybody, put this in context a little, what you're seeing here. We have got hundreds of people in this room. We actually have thousands of people viewing over live stream. I think that really speaks to the power of this movement. And I think what you just saw here was the magic of what we've built. You got half discussion of serious policy making, half hazing one another, and that's how you actually get this magic of this group working together. But the one thing I just want to ask you to consider is we're going to come out of here feeling so good, but it's going to get hard in a month. And I just want you to take this back home with you to your homes, to your districts. When it gets difficult, remember that this kind of work is happening, and we got to hold these people together. So, on to the next portion of our program, and you're going to hear from the voice of God. Voice of God?
Please welcome Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and No Labels Governing Board member Dan Webb.
That's it. Yes.
I don't know what was our walk-in song, anybody? American Girl. Must have been meant for me, Dan.
I was just telling the senator that as a farm kid from Southern Illinois, but who got involved in No Labels because of my commitment to nonpartisan governance, she's my role model and hero. Can we have an applause for her being and get started here? What this senator has done over the last 22 years, as far as her commitment to integrity, leadership, nonpartisan governance, bringing people together, finding solutions, and working so hard to get results, she as someone that is so aligned, at least in my judgment, with no labels. Thank you so much for everything you've done, and we want to give you a chance to talk here a bit today. I'm a trial lawyer. I'm not here to cross-examine you. They tell me I'm a moderator, okay? So let me start with this. Let's just talk about, as far as the commitment to nonpartisan governance and what's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 years, how do you see things? Talk to our audience here.
Well, first of all, again, thank you for the opportunity to have a conversation with you and to our friends at No Labels. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for a commitment to being open-minded about how we tackle the real challenging issues across our country in a way that is good for all. Not a way that is good for the Republicans on Tuesday and good for the Democrats on Friday, but a way that is good for our country as a whole. And I think that's what most people out there in America really want. And you heard the panel before me talking about, let's just get some stuff done. So what does the next 4 years look like? Well, we actually have a little bit of a template because we're now on Trump 2. So we have a little bit of a preview of what we might anticipate going forward. What that means for the parties, what that means for those who dare to stand in the middle, what that means for those who really don't feel like they got a political home sometime. I don't think I've made any secret of the fact that I'm more of a Ronald Reagan Republican than I am a Trump Republican. And some would say, well, you're not really a Republican at all. And I said, you can call me whatever you want to call me. I'm not attached to a label. I'd rather be that no label. I'd rather be that person that is just known for trying to do right by the state and the people that I serve, regardless of party. And I'm totally good and comfortable with that. In fact, I think I am more comfortable with that identity than an identity as a Republican, as a party person. But I think it's going to be hard, quite honestly. I think it's going to be hard in these next 4 years because you have an administration coming in that has had an opportunity to kind of see how things work, what didn't work, and now we've had 4 years to think about it, and the approach is going to be everybody toe the line. Everybody line up. We got you here, and if you want to survive, you better be good. Don't get on Santa's naughty list here because we will primary you. I mean, we are seeing that play out in real time right now with the nominees who have just been named. There's been no committee process on any of them. They're just kind of doing their courtesy calls right now. And my friend Joni Ernst, who is probably one of the more conservative, principled Republican leaders in the Senate right now, is being hung out to dry for not being good enough. And you're going to get primaried. Well, you know, what's this all about? Why are we doing this to ourselves? So I think we're getting a little bit of a preview now of what it's going to mean to be allegiant to party. And I don't think that that's going to help us as a Republican Party, believe it or not. And I think it's going to energize and charge up the Democrats to say, all right, the Republicans are going to overreach, they're going to overreact, and so we're going to have an opportunity. I so wish, and you gave me leash here, Dan. You let me talk. I refrained from that second cup of coffee coming in because I knew I was going to get excited this morning. But we had an opportunity, I think, to give people in this country an alternative in the last go-round, and we didn't feel like we were ready for it. I think people in this country are ready for something other than the red or the blue, that there is a path for those in the middle.
Although, let me ask you about that. that is what led me to no labels, okay? I was convinced that no labels commitment to nonpartisan governance meant things, but I wasn't quite sure what it really would come down to in hardcore results. And then I got involved in the ballot access project of no labels and putting together a true unity ticket. And I would talk to folks across the country, and I think the number was 65 to 70% of the American public wanted to see a different choice. They just wanted to see somebody else that could be put into the mix. And it didn't happen. I mean, we spent an enormous amount of time trying to make that happen, trying to convince respected people to consider leaving their party and running on a unity ticket was challenging. And then we found out recently through discovering a lawsuit that there were groups of people out there that literally had made up their mind to burn us down to the ground. They did that. And so the idea that I'm curious, what impact do you think it could possibly have had? Speculate with me. What impact could it have had if we actually did get a strong unity ticket, and what impact would it have had on what has been one of the most extraordinary presidential elections in American history?
If we had been able to do it, I think it would have allowed the American electorate to finally think about the possibilities outside of the box. I think it would have empowered individuals rather than parties. And that's exactly why both sides are afraid of no labels. That's exactly why in a state like Alaska, where we have instituted ranked choice voting, but through that process, through that electoral reform process, we got rid of closed primaries. The biggest opponents that we had to that initiative were the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, because as soon as you do that, they lose power. They lose power. And that's not what they want. But the Alaskans said, well, wait a minute, I actually like the fact that I might be able to identify who the best candidate is to serve me, whether it's in the Senate or as governor. I like the strength of my vote. And I think if we had been able to demonstrate that through a unity ticket, even if they were not to have prevailed, but if you could have had them out there so that people could have seen the possibility and be free to vote for that, and to demonstrate the strength of that, maybe, just maybe, even if they might not have prevailed, it would have set the table for the next election where you may be able to gain more support. This is hard, but if somebody doesn't start it, it's never going to happen. It's just not going to happen. I have a great relationship with Joe Manchin. And when Joe decided that there was just no way that he could do this, I was incessant. I think he started to avoid me because every time I saw him, I'm like, Joe, you could have fixed this. And, it's water under the bridge, but it's not. It's not, because if we view that, all right, 2024 happened, we missed the shot, and there's never going to be a better time. It's just too late. Well, we will always then be a country where it is a red choice or a blue choice, and there is nothing else. You said something just a minute ago. You said people would have to leave their party. Crazy, crazy idea. Crazy idea that you don't have to leave your party and still be free to express views that are outside of your party lines, right? I'm still a Republican. I was returned to the United States Senate not as a Republican. I had to run as a write-in. So some people probably did put Lisa Murkowski are, close paren. But I think that there were very, very, very few people. I was just Lisa Murkowski. I am still a Republican. Some people think I'm an independent, but I've never shed my party label. But many people say, well, not really a Republican. Do we have to leave our party? You've got a system in the Senate where there's two sides of the aisle. And I have to sit on one side or I have to sit on the other. And you caucus with one or you caucus with the other, and that determines where your committees are. So our structure isn't really set up well for independents. Ask Bernie or Angus or even Kirsten or Joe, because they still sat in the same place, still voted for their majority leader. So we got a weird system, and so I think this is part of our challenge here.
Well, as far as the challenge...
You're letting me ramble way too much. Rein me in.
I'm actually not letting you ramble. You got an audience out here that is very interested in the future. Here's what we hear sometimes. For the next 4 years, the resistance on the Democratic Party to do nothing to help Trump. Nothing whatsoever. I mean nothing. On the other side, you have the Republicans that the slightest step to disagree with Donald Trump is a primary and destruction. And so then people get cynical and say, then are we going into 4 years of nothing? In other words, our commitment to nonpartisan, well, let me just ask this question. The infrastructure bill. Can there be another infrastructure bill in the next 4 years because of what I just said? Or is that going to interfere with that? I mean, I want to hear optimism or candor, because I don't know the answer to that.
I believe that good things can happen in a bipartisan way in the next 4 years. And I believe that strongly because of what we have been able to prove out over the years with good faith efforts and good people who want to do good things and who are not willing to wait for 4 years until we see who we're working with next. We don't have the time, we don't have the luxury to do that. There are too many people in this country who need government to work and to work for them. And so how we're able to do that depends on our will and our commitment. When we let out on the bipartisan infrastructure bill, we weren't asked to go do that. We found that. We determined amongst a small group of 10 members, where can we find common ground? Because if we can find common ground here, maybe we can develop something that we can provide to leadership. We did that after we had put together a second COVID relief package. That after the election, the leadership in both houses and in both parties had said, we're going to take a pass on doing anything until the new teams get sworn in January. This was November. This was before Thanksgiving. And we said, this small group of us met at my house for dinner and sat in a room with all the windows open because it was COVID and Chuck Grassley had just tested positive and everything was a mess. And we said, we got to do something. We can't wait until January to start crafting something. And so what we came together with was something that 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats could agree with. And we went to our leadership and we said, we don't need to own this, but the country needs this. And we gave them a template. And from that template, we got results. We took that model and we did the same then with the bipartisan infrastructure bill later on. We've demonstrated that, and we did it at a time where the Republicans were bound and determined. We're going to push back on everything that comes out of the Biden administration, right? And so we're kind of setting ourselves up into this same scenario. The Dems are going to oppose everything that we want to do, and there's going to be a a requirement for a certain amount of allegiance on the Republican side, but I believe that there are too many good people with good intentions who realize we need to act. The country needs us, and so kind of the politics be damned.
I actually find that very, very encouraging. I'm telling you, I wasn't sure. That answer, with that, good people are still there, and the formula that lessons learned from the infrastructure bill and others could be repeated somewhere in the next 4 years, and so.
I don't know what the issue may be.
That's my question.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what issues might be out there that, as a leader and someone who's been an independent, committed to nonpartisan governance, talk to us a little bit about what, and you can speculate, okay, but what do you see out there that maybe would be in areas that could happen in?
Well, so we know that the Trump administration coming in is going to be very keenly focused initially on the border. That was, that was the campaign, and I think you're going to see that very early on. It's going to be very partisan, because we're going to be moving forward with reconciliation early, whether it is reconciliation that involves border and security, taxes, but we get beyond reconciliation, and again, this is where I think we will have this avenue to be focused on what needs to be resolved on a bipartisan basis, not just because it's good, but when it is bipartisan, it's going to be enduring. When we move things through reconciliation, where it's strict party line, what happens? Look at the ACA, moved by reconciliation, Republicans get in, we need to overhaul it. Democrats pass IRA by reconciliation, Republicans are like, we got to overhaul it. It is when you have bipartisan legislation, where you've got buy-in from both sides, that it sticks around. And that stick-around policy gives those who are looking to put some capital somewhere a little bit of certainty that it's going to stay in place, and you're not going to have this whipsaw from one administration to another. I think one of the areas where we may have some opportunity to build out some good things is in, we talked about infrastructure in the last administration. But think about what's happening in the country right now when it comes to demand for energy. And people are going to say, oh, gosh, you can't go into energy. That equates to climate on the Dem side. And the Republicans are like, no, 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 drill, drill, drill. There's space in the middle. Let me tell you, there is space in the middle, because the things that people want in this country right now are going to depend so much on our ability to meet our ever-increasing energy demands. Look at what is happening with servers, data servers being built up across the country, the jobs that are being created through chips and manufacturing and all the like. So we're going to have to come to some kind of terms on what is it that is going to allow us to move forward in ways that do not do damage or harm from an environmental perspective, but allow for the opportunities that we're all seeking. So I think there's some room there. I think that there's going to be some room when we think about matters related to, say, family leave.
Okay.
So there are opportunities for us. I'd like to say legal immigration is an area where we're going to have that good bipartisan support. My jury's still going to be out on that one until we get through some of the initial moves that we will see from President-elect Trump early on as it relates to the border. It may be that things then become so politically overcharged in that space we can't deal with that, but we must. We have a workforce shortage, certainly in my state. We have workforce issues that we're going to have to deal with, and our legal immigration system is severely dysfunctional right now.
And I noticed in some public statements you've made that you basically have said there will be areas that you will agree with Donald Trump on.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And you've been a leader in the past. You have been, and that's why these people out here, all of us, support you. So in the area of the potential for some type of bipartisan legislation on legal immigration, it's a huge issue. But then what I hear you saying, well, we're going to have to read the early signs from the Trump administration to see if there's an opportunity. Is that in other words, someone like yourself that's committed to nonpartisan governance, you have to, I assume, find the right opportunity where there's a chance to make it work, because failure doesn't accomplish much for anything. Is that fair?
It is a fair summation. You've got to look for the windows of opportunities. Timing's important. And again, the issues themselves, when we decided as a group that we could focus on infrastructure, we had to agree amongst ourselves. How do we define infrastructure? What are we going to narrow it to? Because there were some in the group that said, well, infrastructure will also bring in, the workforce and childcare and many of the softer side that are still an important part of how you build out infrastructure. But we said, no, that's bigger than we can agree to. So it's not something that Lisa Murkowski comes out and says, this is the idea. Do I have anybody who wants to be with me? I don't operate that way. One of the things that I learned a long time ago is I work really hard and I do my homework, but I can't do it alone. I need the good ideas from everybody else. And quite honestly, I don't care if you're a Democrat, if you're a member of the Green Party, I don't care. If you've got a good idea, let's sit down, let's see what we can incorporate, and I can help be one of those that brings the people to the table to talk in a way that hopefully we can achieve some level of consensus. But I think sometimes, we're looking for the perfect. We're looking for just the right Goldilocks chair. And sometimes the chairs don't fit just right. And so maybe we're trying too hard to squeeze something in that doesn't work. But let's figure out the timing. Let's figure out the people. The people.
That matters a lot.
People matter a lot. You have to have those who are willing, who are okay kind of standing out there in the middle, who are okay taking a little bit of criticism, who are okay not getting permission from your leadership to go and sit down and have a meeting and talk about some alternatives.
Let's talk about people. Joe Manchin, you mentioned Manchin. I became friends with him over time and admire him greatly. I saw an op-ed piece that you and he wrote together several years ago on I think it was on energy and climate issues. You're going to have to fill that void, aren't you? I mean, he's gone.
Well, he's gone. I'm never going to suggest that I'm filling Joe Manchin's shoes. He's a character on his own. But you're right. Joe is leaving. Kirsten Sinema played a huge role with our bipartisan infrastructure bill, as did Rob Portman. Rob is gone. Mitt Romney, of course, was right there with us, hugely instrumental. And so we're losing some of those individuals, those voices who were good and were strong and were willing to kind of push things a little bit in order to get us to the right place. And so how we identify those to bring a broader group together is going to be important. And I think it's important to recognize that depending on the issue, you're going to have different people come in. Remember the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Yes. John Cornyn was involved with that and took a very, from his state, a very risky position because people were saying, well, wait a minute, doesn't that mean that you've got gun control provisions in this? And John, who is a, solid, rock solid with the NRA, said, no, this is the right thing to be doing. And so there was a core group that worked with him on that. He hasn't been part of the other ones, but I throw that out there just as an example that depending on the issue, we may have different participants. James Lankford, again, an excellent example of one who has not been part of the gang, of the bipartisan infrastructure gang, but certainly led the immigration effort. That was a very, it was a bipartisan effort until the end there. And so identifying people along with the issues is something that just doesn't happen by accident. It's not just, I'm going to take my best friend list and we're going to come together and see if we can solve some problems.
I'm impressed by your optimism, and let me ask, they got us on a timer here, okay?
Okay.
Here, I want to talk about one issue. I want to give you...
You want to give me 12 seconds?
No, I'm going to give you, I'm going to give you all the time you want. Talk to us a little bit, the importance of us providing support in primary challenges. Focusing our money on where it needs to be is an issue that we hear, okay? And from your standpoint, and folks like you who are truly dedicated to nonpartisan independent governance, and yet the challenges you all face and could face, and our need to do the right thing with financial support in primaries. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
It is important, and I hope that you and everyone in this room recognize the value of what you bring to the table, whether it is through your financial support or just words of encouragement, because it is not easy. It is not easy when it is viewed that you're bucking the party. When you're trying to move forward, you're challenging a party incumbent. You have kind of dared to be more in the middle. It's a very lonely place to be. And our architecture, our campaign architecture is not set up to support that. Our parties support the, if you're going to be one that is going to be true blue to your party label, you're going to get that support from the party, and it means everything from financing to talent, to volunteers, to lists, and you're there. It's no wonder that the party nominees do more favorably. And so you really do feel like you are very much on your own when you are not the party favorite, when you are willing to say, I don't fit well. I don't have that label. I hate the labels that we assign to people. I don't hate it. I really don't like them. I think that it's very problematic. And it puts us in buckets, and then you have to conform to that bucket. What you do and how you do it is important. It needs to continue, but it needs to be broadened. It needs to be deeper, and it needs to be viewed as truly more viable. And so I'm going to encourage no labels. I'm going to encourage the activities in the House and the Senate because I think people in this country are hungry for an alternative to the status quo that has delivered us to the place that we are, the election that we just saw, and we need no labels and we need your support.
Well, thank you very much. You said that.
I know.
Anyway, thank you very much for spending the time. You look out in this audience right now, I'm telling you, you have enormous support, but you've earned it. There's 22 years of your efforts. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Dan.
Please welcome to the stage Eric Hovde of Wisconsin.
How are you all doing today? Wonderful. It's great being here. I love this organization. I just got wrapped up running for the U.S. Senate in Wisconsin. Came really close, and I'll talk about that in my speech. But I'm proud to stand here with all of you because I centrally believe in the core mission of No Labels, and that is bringing our country together. Look, I ran on 4 principal issues. The first one was our financial security, because what we are doing with our deficits, we have bankrupted our country. It is the biggest crisis we face today. Second was domestic security with the defund the police movement and with our open borders was making our cities and states less safe. Third was our international security. We all can look around the world and see the problems that, Europe, Middle East, Asia, the world's in conflict. And fourth, the division in our country. The need of coming together, and as I ran commercials and talked about at every speech, we've got to stop putting on the blue jersey or the red jersey and fighting amongst ourselves. We need to put on the red, white, and blue jersey and come together as Americans and get things done. Thank you. But today, Nancy, who I got to know several years ago and am totally impressed with, she wanted me to talk about my election and what happened in my election, because it was very interesting as I was going through my election and it was coming out what the Democratic Party was doing to No Labels, and then after my election was wrapped up and reading the piece by Matt Taibbi and going through the whole litany of ways that they were trying to destroy No Labels. When I read that, I was absolutely shocked, because everything they were trying to do to No Labels, they did to me, and even the things they talked about that they never did to Nancy and Mark, they actually did to me. So let me give you a quick overview. Before I even announced 4 months, while I was still trying to consider whether I'd run for the U.S. Senate, they sent protesters to my house. They were planning to send, I think, Nancy clowns and people and run banners over Georgetown and make, I think, Mark and Nancy's pariahs in their community. Well, 4 months before I even decided and announced, they sent a group of protesters, transgender protesters, about 40 to 50 of them, to my home, protesting. Now, none of these people knew me because I hadn't announced, and I'd never made any comment about the transgender community, and yet they send them to my house to protest my house. They sent somebody to my door on Halloween night. They rented a big electronic billboard, bigger than the stage, drove it around my city, implanting my head on a guy sitting on a beach in California, saying, Eric Hovde owns a X million-dollar home in California and is voted one of the 3 most influential people in Orange County. This is before I even announced. Now, why were they doing that? They were trying to intimidate me to not run. Well, they didn't know me very well, because that only propelled me to run more. I was born with a lot of thick skin, so it serves you well in politics. But then on the day of announcement, the fun really started. Well, most of you don't know, I've not only been in business, but I have a foundation. And it focuses on 2 things, medical research and MS. Why? Because I have it. And second, rescuing abandoned and street children from around the world. I got 4 homes in Africa, 5 in Central South America. We're saving kids out of the sex trade, out of slavery in the case of Ghana, but rescuing children that have been abandoned. Well, I talked about that at my announcement. I just mentioned it briefly about the Hovde homes. And what did the Democrats do? Their troll farms that light up social media started attacking my foundation and trying to claim that these homes around the world were my personal residence where I hung out in. And then they started trying to dig into my foundation, calling people that work for it and trying to destroy my foundation. Now think of that. I spent 20 years fighting against sex trade and trying to rescue the most vulnerable people in society. But that's what they did. But then it started getting serious. Then they started launching false lawsuits against my companies. So shortly after I had announced, we get a call from a New York Times reporter. What does Mr. Hovde have to say that he's being sued by a 90-some-year-old woman or her family that fell in a nursing home? My campaign staff didn't know what the heck they were talking about. They called me. I didn't have any idea. So we went back and said, well, no, there is no lawsuit. I had to call my bank. My bank used to lend to nursing homes, and there was no lawsuit out there. So we told the New York Times reporter, sorry, you're misinformed, and we're not involved in nursing homes. Well, about 2 weeks later, get a call from the New York Times reporter again, and says, well, you are now being sued, and what do you have to say about it? So again, I call my bank. We haven't been served. This is an important issue. And we can't find anything. So we go into the courts and we find that my bank has now been enjoined an over-a-year-old lawsuit against a nursing home facility that we lent to. And they're trying to claim that me, the candidate who has nothing involvement, doesn't run nursing homes, is responsible for this. I had a conversation with an editor of the New York Times, and I never thought this would happen, basically saying, why don't you let them serve us? We'll immediately get us dismissed, which is, by the way, what ended up happening. We had to go to court to get them to serve us. Now, typically when you sue, what's the first thing you want to do? You want to serve somebody to perfect your lawsuit. We had to go to court to say serve us so we could get it dismissed. But why did they do that? Because they wanted to plant an article and then run an ad, which is exactly what they did. Now, the New York Times reporter, when I told her I'd sue the New York Times, they were a lot more careful with what they wrote. But it didn't stop there. I had the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel seriously write an article that my bank was taking drug cartel money, that they were flying money in, and my bank was taking it. Now, if any of you know anything about the banking industry, you will know that it's probably the most regulated industry. And if I was doing anything remotely close to what they were saying, I would be thrown out of my bank, I'd probably be in jail, and my bank may have been taken over, but certainly would have been hit with millions and millions of dollars in fines. But again, what was the whole objective? To create a false narrative. So you would see ads running every morning, Eric Hovde's banks, drug cartels flying money into his bank and taking money. But the whole campaign from the day one till the very last day was all about deception. They spent over $100 million, first claiming I'm a Californian. First of all, I'm a fourth-generation Wisconsinite. I think you can tell by my voice. I'm pretty Wisconsin. I'm 60 years old. I've lived 40 years of my life in Wisconsin. I've never been a resident of the state of California for 1 year of my life. I bought a home 5.5 years ago after my youngest daughter graduated from school in Wisconsin. But, and the narrative just kept going. I think farmers are lazy. Never said that. Of course, I wanted a national abortion ban. No, I was totally opposed to a national abortion ban. In fact, I believe that women should have a right to choose early in their pregnancy. Thank you. I wanted, of course, to take away Social Security, and the litany went on and on. In fact, one that really blew up in their face is they attacked me that I'm against single moms. Now, I don't know how they ever came up with I'm against single moms, but what you all don't know, I married a single mom. And not only did I marry a single mom, but because I saw the difficulties that single mom went through, I have a home in Madison that helps single moms. Now, that ad blew up in their face because my wife ran an ad, and they shut their ad down pretty quickly. But lastly, if you can believe this, They ran ads at the end saying, I want to ban beer. Ban beer. Now that's sacrilegious in the state of Wisconsin, okay? Sacrilegious. And if you come into my house, I can open refrigerators and give you a lot of beer of all kind, and I like drinking beer. So, you know, it just went on and on. But when you get down to the serious things that ended up happening, they propped it up a false candidate. They put him under the American First brand, was funded by Democrats, Democratic attorneys. They funded a group called Urban Media to get the 2,000 signatures and place him on the ballot. Now, is it legal? Yeah, it's legal. But is it wrong? Of course it is. Because you're deceiving voters. If somebody's showing up that day to go vote and you see America First candidate, what are you going to think? He's aligned with President Trump. So that candidate sucked off 28,000 votes, enough to give Senator Baldwin the victory. Then they also started spending money and promoting a libertarian candidate and running money on his behalf, unbeknownst to him, sucked off 42,000 votes. So these are the things that were happening in my campaign. And then lastly, you come to election night. Most people thought when they went to bed at 1 a.m. that I had won the election. I was comfortably ahead. In fact, President Trump mentioned Wisconsin is part of the red wave. And yet at 4:30 a.m., 120,000 absentee ballots. We are one of the only 6 states that has same-day registration voting and probably has the loosest absentee ballot laws in the country, were dropped, of which Senator Baldwin won an astounding 85% of them. Yeah. So there's a lot there. I'm not going to get into it. I don't have the time. I'm getting somebody looking at me saying, you got to get going. But the point is, our election process is broken. I got one debate for 1 hour on a Friday night after early voting started. Our campaigns today are about special interest money pouring into 501c3s and 501c4s and distorting and lying everything about you. Campaigns should be about 2 people standing in front of you, addressing your questions, answering them, and telling you how they're going to vote on issues and how to make the people's lives of this country better. Thank you. There's a lot we need to change. One, somehow American Idol could count 80 to 100 million votes in 5 minutes and tell you who won American Idol. And we have congressional districts in California that can't count for 2 to 3 weeks. And Milwaukee couldn't get their act together all day and took till 4:30 in the morning. 2, we have to shed light on these dark money pools, the 501c3s and C4s, and bring to light that attack no labels. 3, the press. You have to get back to your principal role. In the old days, if people lied, you would hold them accountable. Instead, the press was a propaganda tool against me. These are the things that need to change. I can't talk anymore because they're pulling me off. It was great being here. Nancy, you're the best. Thank you, No Labels. Keep fighting for your country.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Ben DuPont of Delaware.
Thank you all very much. I'm blown away by what Nancy and the team at No Labels have built. And I'm blown away at the dialogue, perhaps more importantly, the dialogue that it is creating. When you see I mean, I don't know what the answer to a lot of the big issues we've got. I don't know how we get the deficit under control. I think that's maybe issue number one. I don't know what the right solution is, but I do know that the way we get to that solution is by having good people from different parties talking. And that's exactly what occurs on this stage, and it's just inspiring. I'm glad to be an American today. God bless. God bless America, and God bless Nancy. The question is, it begs the question, what gets hundreds of people to get on planes and come to Washington, D.C. to participate in a gathering like this? Not the weather. I think it's that we want, but it's not just that we want to bring America together a little bit, is that we want to shake things up. We want to grab the entrenched political elite and say, enough. Enough of the partisan status quo, enough of the entrenched political classes seeking to divide us. I think we're here to change politics for the better before it changes America for the worst. And that requires disruptive thinking. I built my career as a venture capitalist, which is all about finding people that see things a little bit differently and see a better future that others can't. They peer around corners and they look for non-obvious solutions. I call it non-obvious thinking. And I wrote a book about it, just hitting the bookstores this week. I think it's foundational not just to our business sector, but to our entire country. If you think about it, non-obvious thinking is how we created the airplane, the internet, how we won 2 world wars, how we walked on the moon, how we created a revolution in healthcare that doubled life expectancies globally. It's enshrined in our founding documents, meaning it's not just what we do, I think it's who we are. A few years back, I began to notice that there's one area of American life where non-obvious thinking is discouraged, and it's our political system. So I did what I try to do frequently, which is start looking for the disruptors. And I came across No Labels. Hard to not be impressed with Nancy. And I became the chair of No Labels Delaware. And as you know, Delaware is not just any state, it's the home state of President Biden. It's run by one political party who didn't want to see their president and friend challenged. Despite lots of high-flying rhetoric about democracy, they weren't going to let a subtle thing of ballot rights stand in the way. So the state's election commissioner, the very individual tasked with protecting electoral integrity, decided to block No Labels from the ballot and went out to find excuses on how to do it. He used a claim from an anonymous tipster that were 4 anonymous tipsters. I suspect they actually might have been all from the same phone. Don't know, but wouldn't surprise me. Who were claiming that No Labels was tricking voters into the registration process. Never mind that No Labels used best-in-class practices, the best class practices you can imagine to register voters. State officials made the absurd argument that 0.1% misunderstanding rate among voters invalidated the 99.9% that said No Labels was a good idea and should be allowed on the ballot. Even worse, they attempted to change the rules to say that we could not proactively recruit voters, that we had to be passive and let voters approach us. Now, you don't have to be a constitutional scholar. I'm certainly not one, but I think that's a violation of First Amendment rights. I ought to be able to stand on the street corner with a petition that shoes are a good idea, right? So I'd had enough. I wrote a blistering op-ed page piece that ran in every paper in the state of Delaware. Interestingly, 36 hours later, they modified their opinion and they allowed No Labels on the ballot. kind of remarkable. I learned two things from this. One, our two-party political system is very frequently focused on self-preservation. And two, to change the system, a little sunlight is a good thing. We have to raise awareness of the hypocrisy and dirty tricks, and you just learned some from the gentleman who spoke before me. We have to raise awareness of the hypocrisy and dirty tricks so that regular, good, hard-working Americans can do something about it, and I think that's why we're here today. This conference is historic. Let me close by asking you to imagine a world where we succeed, where the non-obvious thinking employed by no labels goes mainstream. You saw a glimpse of it just before me, this whole program. America could leave bad ideas because they're not ideologically impure, not because they're ideological, but because they no longer serve us. We could adopt solutions that could actually solve problems and heal divisions. Political innovation would not be feared, but a welcome path to progress, and you saw a lot of it. We can usher in that world, but we got to be a little bold. There's a tendency to think bipartisanship is nicety nice, go along, get along. But I don't think that's what No Labels is about. Some of the best innovators I know in the private sector use the slogan, move fast and break a few things. I think No Labels is successful because it behaves a little bit like those startups. It thinks differently, it makes decisions quickly, and when it does fail, it picks up and tries again. And most importantly, we don't roll over and wag our tails when the establishment kicks us. When they throw lawsuits at us, we throw lawsuits back. When they try to disrupt democracy, we're going to disrupt them. When they lie about us, and they lied a lot about us, we're going to expose the truth about them. So when you go home and your friends and family ask you what this event was about, I want you to say it was a conference about political disruption, about finding non-obvious ways to change the system and making it better. God bless you, and thank you very much.
Please direct your attention to the screen as we welcome Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina.
Good morning. Tom Tillis from the great state of North Carolina. I should ask, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to assume that the audience can hear me. I haven't gotten a message from the video coordinator. First, let me apologize for not being there in person. I'm in between a committee meeting and another meeting I have to get to very quickly. But I want to thank No Labels and my friend Pat McCrory, who I think is probably in the room right now, for a very important work that you're doing. And I think if I were going to sum up the greatest value that an organization like No Labels can provide, it's reinforcement for those who demonstrate courage on Capitol Hill. We do, I think that I was thinking this morning when I was anticipating speaking with you all today, and I've heard so many people say, well, we just don't have the courage in Congress that we did back in the day. You know, pick your favorite period. I don't think that that's true. I think what we have now is, I wonder, for example, what we would be saying if we had 24-hour news coverage, social media, digital ads, micro-targeting, crowdsourcing of protests. If we had those back in the 80s, would those folks look any more courageous than our folks today? And I think the answer is no. What we have now is technology and 24-hour pressure on members that is the norm, and it's not going to go away. So now how do we deal with it? I'm not sure that I have the solution, but I believe that you all are a part of it. And a part of what we have to do is figure out how we reward good, objective, courageous behavior in Washington. And quite honestly, how we deal with consistent problems in Washington, D.C. Members that are simply at the polar opposite corners, only trying to stop everything unless it's their concept of perfect. Perfect doesn't exist in this country. A more perfect union was the objective of the Founding Fathers, understanding there was a process that you would never get there, but you always strive to. Well, we need people out there holding people accountable when they slow those of us like me down on things that we know that the American people want. And we need your help. But we also need the edge that comes with the consequences that come with people who are repeat offenders, or people that you may think are worthy of no labels, accolades, who then do something that makes no sense for an organization like this to condone. For example, promising to never nuke the filibuster and then voting to nuke the filibuster, promising to when it's easy and then voting to nuke it when it's not. We have to have serious discussions with good members and good friends in Congress who are not necessarily living up to our state motto, esse quam videri, to be rather than to seem. If you want to be independent and if you want to be committed to this institution, then you must consistently live those ideals. So let's have a serious discussion going into this Congress with members that I would ask, now that the Republicans are in control, tell me why I shouldn't be voting to nuke the filibuster when, after you promised to never do that, do it for President Biden. Of course, I'm not going to support nuking the filibuster, but I want to have those uncomfortable conversations with some friends of mine who seemed to be bipartisan when it was easy, then failed to be when it was hard. We need organizations who hold people accountable over time. We need organizations who reward people who are right of center, left of center, maybe extreme on certain positions, but we are willing to set aside our conservative or liberal ideals for making progress for the American people. You all are already playing an important role in this space, but I believe that there are so many more opportunities for you all to cut through the modern challenges that we have here in Washington, hold people accountable, and do great things for the great people of this wonderful, best ever country, the United States of America. So I think my friend Todd Young may be there already. I want to get him back over here. I believe he's speaking after me. But you can count me in for having frank discussions and holding people accountable when they're not living up to my state motto. And when they are, we should do everything we can to make sure that they can be in Congress for as long as they want to be. If we do that, then we will do great things for this country, and we'll do great things for as a role model for the future generation of leaders who come behind us. So I thank you all today for being a part of No Labels. I thank you all in advance for how we can really get people to walk the talk and deliver on what I think your vision is for a better, more functional Congress. Thank you all. I hope you have a great conference.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts.
Good morning. Well, I certainly hope we hold people like Pete Hegseth accountable. We shall see. I was at a Library of Congress dinner last night. It's an amazing tradition we have every month now, where it's a one bipartisan, bicameral event that we have on a regular basis. And I always try to sit next to some Republican senator that I haven't had the opportunity to get to know or to work with. The Librarian of Congress, though, at one of these dinners recently came up to me and said, "Seth, I really like your background." And I was quite flattered because, you know, there's 535 of us between the House and the Senate. But I was also curious, and I said, what is it about my background? I mean, I'm a little bit unusual. I have a physics degree. There aren't many of those in Congress. I came here, I'm a little bit of a nerd, came here from the Marines. Maybe that was what she thought was interesting. So I pressed her. I said, what is it about my background that you like? She said, no, I really like your background. I said, no, I understand. I'm flattered. Just curious what aspect. No, your background, your Zoom background on TV. I really like your background. So now when kids ask, what do you need to do to be successful in politics, I sometimes say plants. People really like plants. But I do want to make two quick points about my background as a means of introducing myself. The first is that I came here to Congress by beating an 18-year incumbent in a primary. But I did it by running to the center. I said that he was too partisan. That's why he wasn't effective. He'd only passed one bill in 18 years. And we can do better if we're willing to work across the aisle. That might sound like a quaint notion, but I won a Massachusetts Democratic primary about 10 years ago with that message. The second point I would like to make is that I had no interest in politics whatsoever when I got into politics. This is not what I expected to do with my life. As I mentioned, I studied physics in college. For everyone in life who sees my resume and not my transcript, that makes me sound very smart. But the reason I'm here is because I did 4 tours in the infantry in Iraq. And as a Marine officer, I had the opportunity to serve with amazing Americans from all over this country. And we all came together with different religious backgrounds, different political beliefs, from all different states of the Union. And yet we were able to set aside those differences to do what's best for America. Isn't that what you should expect of Congress? And doing what's best for America, doing what's fundamentally right, doesn't seem to always happen much in Congress. And people ask me back home, Seth, why is Congress so stupid? How can you not believe in the science of climate change or whatever the issue of the day is? And my observation after being here for about 9 years is that actually most of my colleagues are pretty intelligent. And what's lacking is not intelligence, but courage. Just the courage to do the right thing, to vote the right way, to stand up when you know what's right might not be in your political interest. Now, if you think back to Ted Sorensen's book on profiles in courage, John F. Kennedy's book, Profiles in Courage, a little bit of a Massachusetts joke there. Every example that he used was an example of a senator standing up to his own party. Not standing up to the other party, to his own party. Taking on your own party is hard. I've done it a few times. Most recently, I challenged the party to examine some of our positions on certain issues and our unwillingness to even entertain debate about some of the most divisive, especially social issues facing our country. I used as an example the idea that maybe trans rights should not be absolute. Indeed, the Olympics has restrictions on trans women in sports, for example. But this is one of these things that I'm not supposed to say as a Democrat. Well, needless to say, the immediate backlash proved my point. That you're not supposed to say certain things. We can't even have a debate. And by the way, this does a terrible disservice to the very people that we should be trying to protect. Because if trans rights are defined just by the extreme, by the Republican agenda or Trump's agenda, and we don't have a reasonable debate in the center about what compromises we should make, then a lot of those people are going to get hurt. But the backlash was swift. I was called a Nazi corroborator or something by the local party. Tufts announced that they would no longer support internships in my office. My question was, if you won't support internships with me, what are you going to do when, God forbid, a Tufts student actually wants to work in a Republican office? And I already have a couple people planning to run against me in a primary. I'm being primaried over a sentence. All of that for expressing an opinion that the majority of Americans agree with. So what's happened? Until not long ago, we were the party of free speech. We welcomed real, rigorous debate, oftentimes when orthodox conservatives in the Republican Party were afraid of change. We raised the struggles of the working class to become national issues. That's how we delivered Social Security and Medicare when wealthy Americans already had good health care. It's why we expanded freedoms by allowing women to make their own health care decisions and everyone to marry whomever they love, changing the status quo. In every case, we listened, we built trust, and we welcomed those who disagreed into our expanding tent, the very definition of a majority party. Now, I'm a proud Democrat. I believe deeply in my party's values: honesty, compassion, belief in true facts, science, a desire to help the underserved, the underrepresented, not to scapegoat and marginalize them. These are firm foundations in our party's history. But today, too many people feel that Democrats are out of touch. We've worked so hard to become so tolerant of every little narrow group that as a whole, we've become intolerant if you don't check the box on every one of those issues. But despite all of this, I believe we can turn it around. I think that we need to look ourselves in the mirror after losing an election that, quite frankly, should have been easy for us to win. What are some of the things we need to do? We need to get out and start listening to Americans. Be very public about listening rather than preaching, not talking down to people when they disagree. We need to stop feeling beholden to these narrow interest groups, filling out their surveys and getting scored on every single issue. I think we need a new dynamic leader as at the head of the DNC, someone who's going to force change. And we need to invest in strengths, in success stories. I have an organization called Serve America that I started to get principled leaders elected to Congress. Our win rate in the last election was 89%. That's pretty good when you look at the party overall. Back in 2018, when Democrats had to flip the House to restore some balance to the Congress, to put a check on the Trump administration, over 50% of the seats that we flipped in the entire party across the entire country were my Serve America candidates, some of whom you've heard here. If we start doing things like that, Democrats can start winning elections again. We can win debates. We can represent the majority of Americans, many of whom feel left out in the cold. I fought for America because I believe in America. And I keep fighting in Congress because I still believe in this country. We've got a lot of work to do. But I firmly believe today that with your help, we can get there. Thank you.
And now, please welcome back No Labels Governing Board Member Dan Webb and Chief Strategist Ryan Clancy.
So we've spent the balance of our time today talking about looking forward and what our congressional allies are going to do. You might wonder, though, at certain points, we've been talking about the past and what was done to us when we tried to put up the unity ticket. And you might ask yourself, well, why is No Labels focusing on this, crying over spilled milk? Here's why. Because the things that were done to us weren't just a barrier to our getting on the unity ticket. It is a barrier to the change we want to create. Because the playbook that was used to keep us off the ballot is increasingly used to intimidate candidates other public officials, anybody who steps out of line from whatever the dominant consensus is. And one thing we've picked up along the way is that, unfortunately, current law might not be enough to prevent this kind of stuff from happening. So we started to ask ourselves, how do you maybe put up a framework that respects the First Amendment rights and free speech and the rights of free expression, but doesn't allow these often anonymous, well-funded groups to assassinate people's reputations, to intimidate people? And what we came up with is something we want to share with you today, and that we're going to be advocating as we go here forward. To talk about this is Dan Webb. Now, who is Dan? Dan is former assistant U.S. attorney, a former U.S. attorney, a former head of director of the Illinois Law Enforcement, and today the co-chair of Winston and Strawn. What it all adds up to is, if you're in a courtroom, you hope Dan is on your side. So I want to hand it over to Dan to talk about some of the specifics about a reform that we think could prevent what happened to us from happening to others. Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. So, yes, what happened to us, and by the way, what happened to us, we really didn't know was happening to us at the time. I'm telling you, we did not know. And I'm not going to go back through it. You've read all the articles. What happened to us was really insidious. It was a conspiratorial plan to destroy no labels, and it should not have happened, but it did. So it's been my view, and I think others at No Labels, the legal board, that we at least got to think about what we're going to do. Because, by the way, you could say, does it really matter what happened to you? But I'm going to digress for a second. There was a major political leader in Illinois, a Democrat, who was my close friend. When he read some publicity, I was supporting No Labels and doing a unity ticket, and called me up and said, Webb, what's the bullshit? Why are you doing this? I know you're a lifelong Republican. You do not support Donald Trump. And why are you trying to help Trump and hurt Biden? And I said, that's bullshit, okay? That's not what the polls show. That's not what we're doing. And get a life. I saw that person. 2 nights ago, we had a Christmas party at Winston and Strong. And it's a very great party. We all have a great time. Alcohol's consumed. This guy walks up to me, who's a friend, and said, I owe you an apology. He said, I'm telling you what I was thinking. I'm thinking about the night there was a debate, and a fellow named Trump and Biden were standing on that debate stage. If there had been a third person standing on that debate stage the night that Biden exploded and self-destructed, I don't know what would have happened to this election, but in thinking about it, I was wrong and you were right. And I accepted his apology. But due diligence, prudence, and just common sense tells you we got to at least think about what we might be able to do. There's been no decisions made by No Labels as to what to do, but there's 2 things we're at least internally talking about, so you as supporters understand that we're not ignoring the past, but at the same time, we're not foolish enough to do stupid things in the future. And so here's the things we're thinking about doing. Number 1, as Ryan mentioned, that yes, we could consider sponsoring and getting sponsors for amendments to legislation that would probably do 2 things. Number 1, right now the law is fuzzy on whether an entity like No Labels could actually just file a civil lawsuit. If you're subjected to threats, force, intimidation, and harassment because you're trying to do a ballot access project, or you're trying to find candidates to run for federal office, if you're trying to do that, there are laws that could be amended that make it clear that if those things happen to you, you would have a civil cause of action. Now, the reason that's important is probably because of the following. We did send this, all the laws right now are drafted so that DOJ really controls all of this. So if you have a bitch or beef about it, just go tell DOJ. Well, we did that. And DOJ hasn't done anything right now, to the best of my knowledge. And so that's fine, that's their prerogative. But we did go to DOJ. So drafting legislation so we have a civil cause of action, I think is something that at least we should consider evaluating. Number 2, there's another statute made by the Federal Election Commission, some statutes which we could get creative and add on a provision that if you all out there in some entity or organization decide you're going to plan out to harass, intimidate, and destroy organizations involved in ballot access activity or recruiting candidates for federal office, if you do that, you have to give notice you're doing it to the Federal Election Commission. And so giving notice to them, and then we were going to require that they have to notify their 10 largest donors that they're engaging in this conduct. Now, whether that statute could be amended to do that, internal discussions are going on, but at least we're thinking about how to do that in the near future. Secondly, we're at least thinking about and talking about, because of the harm that was caused us, should we actually consider a lawsuit followed by no labels? And that's something we're at least talking about. Others have been of the view, and I agree with them, that if we're going to do a major lawsuit, we don't want to spend donor money doing it. We're going to have to go out. I do tons of litigation work. I deal with these funders all the time. Their whole business is they're funding major litigation. They evaluate the case, and if they want to fund it, they get a piece of the action, they get a percentage of the recovery, and they fund it. And so I think Nancy and others, Andy and others at No Labels, at least expect us to evaluate it, look at it, see if we can get the funding. If we can't get the funding, we would never do it. And by the way, I'm not even sure we should even, we're talking to funders now, but whether we should do it depends on whether at the end of the day we really believe that we have a very strong claim that will survive a motion to dismiss, and I'm not sure we should do it. I'm not sure we should do it, but at least I believe due diligence and prudence dictates, and I would think that all of you as No Label supporters, based on what happened to us, that at least we engage in considering options that we have available to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan.
Please welcome Professor, neuroscientist, and author, Dr. Sam Wong.
So one other idea that we want to talk to you about with Professor Wang is this is another reform idea we're thinking of, and it's this. All of you here, I'm sure, if you've been on No Labels calls, you've heard us talk about our primary system as being a root cause of so much of what's wrong with our politics, because turnout is so low, and the people who do turn out tend to be more to the right or left than everybody else. And for over 80% of House races, these are the only races that matter. So we started thinking, how could you get more turnout? And one idea we came on was a national primary day. One of the reasons that turnout is so low is primaries are held from March through September. Most people don't even know what it is. Frankly, local officials in states sometimes intentionally put these on off days when they know everybody's on vacation. So we started thinking, well, if you could increase turnout, would that make a difference? So we got in touch with Sam and his team, and we know for a fact that if two states even hold an election close to each other, turnout improves. So you could reason that same thing would happen with National Primary Day. The question we asked Sam and his team to look at is, if you got more turnout, if you went from 20 to 30% or 20 to 40%, what would happen? And let me hand it over to the professor to talk about that.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Ryan. It's intimidating being here because, unlike everyone else, I'm not an elected official. I'm a working scientist. I'm so used to showing lots of slides. I promise today I'm going to show one slide, okay, just one. But let me talk about the slide first. So the basic idea that we're talking about here is the fear of primaries. So the question is, what do we do about that? And I would say, as a working scientist, when we review grants at NIH, like many scientists, NIH funds my research, we ask two questions. Can it be done, and should it be done? And I think it's the job of No Labels and the strategic thinkers to think about, can it be done? And that's in large part in y'all's hands. Should it be done? And what we did was we used the tools of my field. We used math and computation and cognitive science to try to understand how voters think, to try to understand how that voter thought process is translated into representation, and to understand what an increase in turnout might produce. Now, just to tell you some things you may already know, over half of Americans are not registered to either party. Of those who are registered to a party, only 20% of them vote in a primary typically. And what that means is that something like 10% of Americans end up nominating. And to quote Boss Tweed from 150 years ago, I don't care who does the electing as long as I get to do the nominating. And so what we did is we looked at a survey. There's a survey called the Cooperative Election Survey. It's a survey that asks voters all kinds of things about issues, whether it be guns or abortion or the military or what have you. And we analyzed 62 of those questions. We used the tools of our field, mathematical biology, to understand how primary voters think versus how those who do not vote in primaries. And we found something kind of interesting. And this speaks directly to the idea that Ryan's talking about. Now, these curves here on the left, I warned you, there's going to be data. This is my one slide. Those curves that say voted in D primary and voted in R primary, those are primary voters. And using our mathematical analysis, looking at these 62 questions on the survey, we found that people who vote in primaries indeed are in fact piled up on the left and on the right. We used a technique called principal component analysis. You don't need to know about that. It won't be on the test. But we use this tool to see that voters who vote in the primaries, in fact, vote fairly to the ends. They're ideologically coherent according to this single axis. And we ran a simulation to see what kind of people they elected, and that's that gray curve on the right that says current turnout. And then we asked the question, what happens if you increase turnout? Now, these shaded in regions that are blue and red, they say didn't vote. These are people who are registered Democrats and registered Republicans who yet did not vote in the primary. And I think you can see pretty easily that they are more focused towards the center of this distribution. They even overlap with each other a substantial amount. These are Americans who are registered Democrats and Republicans who didn't vote. And then we ran a simulation again, and what we found was, in fact, when we ran hundreds and hundreds, actually thousands of simulations, we found that more election winners, in fact, are closer to the center. So we found through our simulation methods that high turnout does indeed appear to be likely to elect more moderates to whatever legislature or Congress. Now, this is work that's done by Drew Curran and Victor Odoard, who work with me at Princeton University. And we're very interested in this because I think the general finding here is that increased turnout can make a difference. And we've heard over and over again about people who are afraid of being primaried. And this is a choke point in American democracy that we think that at least potentially could have the capacity to change the flavor of, and the type of people who are elected to Congress.
Thank you, Professor. We're going to hear a lot more about this idea from us in the months to come, but we wanted to give you an early read on this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Someone else instead of me always seems to know the way.
Please welcome Andy Bursky.
Then I look at you, and the world's all right with me. Just one look at you.
I have a suggestion. Why don't you stand up? Stand up. Hello? Okay, we're live. Everybody stand up, stretch, shake it out. Want to keep you healthy? Okay, you can sit down now. That was my my contribution to your good health. How are we doing? Good. No, you really can't sit down. I wanted to just take a second. There's an extraordinary team of folks at No Labels who are often in the background. Occasionally you'll see their face on a screen on one of the 37,000 Zooms they do each year for you. But these individuals are tireless, they're fearless. This organization punches well above its weight, and it's because we have extraordinary people who show up every day, not to get rich, but to do the country's work. And so I want to give a shout out to Nancy, our leader, and the team. ladies and gentlemen, if you could stand up, those of you who are on the No Labels staff. Margaret Liz McKinley? Margaret Liz McKinley? Okay. Here they come. Here comes someone. Who's that? Is that Margaret? Okay. Come on out, girls. Okay. Thank you. McKinley? I know where Liz is. This is the engine that makes it all go. And so today, but really every day, fighting out on the battlefield, it's you two and your team that make it all happen. So I just want you to know how much I appreciate it. And Liz.
But could we just give also a round of applause to all of the people in the purple shirts, because truly this is the most amazing team, and I know you all know so many of them, and just a round of applause for the entire staff. All right, I believe Senator Cassidy has joined the Zoom, so we are going to resume our programming. Thank you guys so much for being here.
So I'm going to engage in an unnatural act and talk to a television screen. Hello, Senator.
Hey, Andy, nice to see you. I like resume the Zoom.
Resume the Zoom. Resume the Zoom. Let me provide an introduction to someone who probably needs no introduction to all of you. Senator Bill Cassidy is the senior senator from Louisiana. He is a gastroenterologist by training. He has, from my perspective, the most incisive mind, particularly on technical matters in the Senate. He is the ranking member on the Senate Health Committee, which has jurisdiction over all things health, education, and labor. He will become the chairman of that committee in a few short weeks. Please. We will be, as a nation, extraordinarily well served by that promotion. Senator Cassidy, on top of everything else, is one of the genuinely decent people in Congress. He is a marvelous human being. He cares deeply about his state. He cares deeply about the country. He has been on the front lines of every battle we fought, every legislative victory that No Labels has achieved. Bill Cassidy's fingerprints have been all over. So, sir, I want to give you my personal thanks for all that you have done and continue to do for our organization. Now behind that mild-mannered demeanor is a fierce warrior who has extraordinary courage, and if you have any question about that, he's decided to take on the small matter of Social Security reform. He has been working on this for some years. He has a plan that has been praised by Wall Street, by the financial community, been praised by both right and left. And so we want to talk about that today. And so maybe, Senator, we can begin with a framing of the issue. Why is this matter of such urgency? Maybe you can dimensionalize the problem, and then we can talk about the solution that the Cassidy bill proposes.
Yeah, so thank you, Andy. Thank you all for being there, and thank you for what you do. I'll allude to things how you know labels have influenced our process throughout as I go through this conversation. The Social Security Trust Fund goes insolvent in 9 years. So right now, over many years, people paid more into the trust fund than was going out. That corpus built up. Now, by law, that corpus can only be invested in treasuries, which is to say that some of those treasuries were bought at a 1% yield, a 2% yield, and these have been losing value over this high inflation period. When the trust fund goes insolvent, there'll be nothing to supplement the payments being made to beneficiaries. So if right now beneficiaries are going out at this level and income is coming in at that level, it is the trust fund which is supplementing and giving adequate amounts of money to pay scheduled benefits. When the trust fund goes empty, by law, the amount going out has to sync to the amount coming in, and there'll be a 21 to 24% benefit cut for all beneficiaries, current and future. That will double the poverty rate among the elderly, among those over 65. I don't think 65 is elderly anymore. It'll double that poverty rate. So no one thinks, though, that Congress is going to let that happen. Probably Congress will make the decision to supersede current law and just borrow money to pay the benefits. If you do that in nominal dollars, over 75 years, we will have to borrow roughly $610 trillion, both to pay the benefits and to pay the borrowing cost. If you combine the Social Security shortfall with the Medicare shortfall, by 2050, there'll be a 250% debt to GDP ratio. Now, Penn Wharton says that when that happens, that the effect upon the markets will be, upon our economy will be such that no amount of taxes, budget cuts, or anything else will be able to stabilize the economy. And it will have international reverberations. CBO says we cannot say that at any one debt to GDP ratio that it'll become unrecoverable. We can say that there'll be a significant crowd out of the money available for private investment, at which point you'll begin to see a diminution of the economy. Now, this is 2050. This is 25 years from now. Andy, should I talk about our solution now?
Please.
Or you tell?
No, let's get to the fix.
So many of you, all of you in that room know so much more about money than I do. I'm a gastroenterologist. You know, what do I know? I can tell you some things I know, but it would make you maldigest your breakfast. But I remember having a conversation, and there had been an inversion of long-term yield over short-term yield during the Trump administration. And I asked one of you folks, what does that mean? And you explained it to me, and the light bulb went off. I said, wait a second. Maybe we could come up with an investment strategy that could actually pay off Social Security and, if you will, have a free lunch. Now, that has evolved. That has evolved into what we currently are suggesting, which is to have an independent investment fund, independent of the Social Security Trust Fund, put $1.5 trillion in it over 5 years, and invest it in the broader economy. No longer only treasuries with low yield, but in the stock market, real estate, other things that would be managed by someone that would bid to manage one of these tranches of investment funds. If you do that and you return all dividends and proceeds back to the investment fund for 70 years, 75 years, but you begin to borrow simultaneously to pay scheduled benefits, the so-called equity premium, the difference between the return on investment and the borrowing cost, will end up, by the rule of 12, compounding out, and you have this incredible, like, champagne glass type figure at the top, and it ends up paying, depending on how you do this, 70 to 85% of the unfunded accrued liability. It is the power of compounding, which I now, as a gastroenterologist, speak of routinely. And it is amazing. By the way, no labels, folks. Y'all have been fantastic. I've met with various members who would say, well, 20 years is the longest we've gone with the down market. And, and just little things as I presented that we've been able to take back and incorporate that wisdom, both in terms of how it works, but also how it's presented. We have a bipartisan plan. We have House members and Senate members, both parties, who are willing, even under a Trump presidency, because that tends to kind of set Democrats on edge, are willing to come together and try and pass this. and I can talk about more details, Andy, but this is something that we're going to introduce at the beginning of next Congress and try and push really hard at the very beginning.
Thank you, Senator. Let's talk. Let's talk about politics and process, because I can hear the minds of many in the room, which is probably not different than what is churning in my mind, which is we have a history on the big problems in Washington of ultimately addressing them, but only at the very last moment when we have no choice. As you point out, the shit doesn't hit the fan for some time. And so what we're asking you and your colleagues in both houses to do is to do something that is, has the potential of being politically unpopular at a minimum in advance of the 5-alarm fire breaking out. How do you think about that just from a political standpoint? How do you get this done?
Yeah, totally good question. The traditional approach to fixing social is to eat your spinach. We're going to cut your benefits, we're going to raise your taxes. Now, Tom Swazi last night pointed out that 60% of Americans don't have a college degree. The majority make less than $80,000 a year. Susie Lee said something like that as well. And so, point being, if you go to the American people and say, we're going to fix social, they think you're going to cut my benefits, and right now I'm struggling. We are instead increasing benefits for many. We're putting in a minimum benefit ratio so someone who's lower wage will actually get more than she otherwise would under our proposal. We're putting in work incentives so that someone who goes back to work after age 65 is rewarded for going back to work, as opposed to the current system where they feel as if they're being punished for going back to work. So instead of preaching eat your spinach, we're saying we are going to live off our abundance. Now, when you begin to speak about abundance and about improving benefits for people, it changes the dialogue. One other thing about it, there's something which is called weapon GPO, because the politics is another dimension of this. Weapon GPO, windfall elimination provision, government pension offset, affects 16 states in which non-federal, which is to say state and local public servants who don't pay into Social Security while working for the state, only into a state pension fund, are overly penalized for when they start to draw down social. Now, that's more technical than you need to know. All you need to know is there's highly mobilized retired public servants in a state like California with 54 members of Congress, a state like Texas with 36 members of Congress, a state like Louisiana with 6 members of Congress, but around whom the whole universe revolves. And so it gets me Democratic senators and Democratic members of Congress with an eagerness to fix this problem, as long as we're not eating spinach. Because in these big states with lots of members of Congress, there is people knocking on their door, please fix this issue. And that is the politics of it. We got a lot of politics to do. I would like President Trump to be known as the president. FDR founded it, Reagan propped it up, and Trump fixed it. And if we can get presidential buy-in, that's actually the epitaph that would be, that he fixed it. Because, by the way, with this proposal, there's a possibility that we evergreen and we never need worry about funding for the Social Security Trust Fund again.
That would be an extraordinary legacy. Who do you expect to show up as co-sponsor on the legislation, and what kind of support do you see at this point in the House?
Yeah, so right now, Angus King and Tim Kaine and Lindsey Graham and I are going to put out a editorial in Washington Post. If there's any reporter in the room, the Washington Post, I won't say that, in a journal, we're going to publish an editorial. If there's any reporters in the room, that's off the record. But we hope to get that out there, and that is a signal that it's bipartisan. So that's the thing. On the House members, no labels. Nancy Jacobson, thank you, be still my heart. You're the one who set up all the meetings right now with the people on the House side that we're working with. We're briefing them. We're bringing them on board. And we'll pick out that. We've had people last time. We had people last time, I won't say their names this time until they formally commit to be public, but we have bipartisan people who are very interested. And a lot of it's the weapon GPO issue, by the way. So knowing that no one in that room knows anything about it, it's really important to key people from key states. So I think we'll have our bipartisan.
Senator, can't thank you enough. This is obviously among the most important issues facing our country. Few have had the courage to take it on. We appreciate you. We appreciate all you've done for No Labels, for your state, and for the country. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Hey, thank you all. Thank you.
All right. At this time, we would like to invite everyone to join us just across the hall in the East Ballroom for lunch. We will begin our program back in this room